The final item of business is members' business debate on motion 19700 in the name of Jackie Baillie on Enable Scotland campaign in safe hands. This debate will be concluded without any questions being put, and I would ask those who wish to speak in the debate to press the request to speak buttons now. And I call on Jackie Baillie to open the debate for around 7 minutes, please.
Thank you very much, Presiding Officer. Let me declare at the start that I'm very proud to be the convener of the cross-party group on learning disability. And I'm grateful for the opportunity provided by this members' debate to talk about Enable Scotland's latest campaign, In Safe Hands. This campaign seeks to end the inappropriate restraint and seclusion of children and young people with a learning disability and promote the rights of some of the country's most vulnerable pupils. Let me start by paying tribute to Beth Morrison. Beth is a member of Enable Scotland's Scottish Council and Families Committee. She is the founder and CEO of Positive Action and Behaviour Support Scotland. She lodged a petition in this Parliament some time ago, collecting stories from over 400 families in Scotland whose children have experienced seclusion and restraint at school. And she is without doubt the inspiration for this campaign, the inspiration for the refreshed Scottish Government guidance in 2017, and the inspiration for the investigation by the Children and Young People's Commissioner in Scotland. The Parliament should be aware that this was the first time that the Commissioner had used their statutory investigative powers to shine a light on this issue and to demand change. So let the Parliament tonight celebrate the contribution made by Beth Morrison in being a determined campaigner for change. The stories told by parents are frankly shocking. And let me quote to you from primary research conducted by Enable Scotland. One parent said of their child's experience, her arm was forced up her back, she was put on the floor and held there whilst the teacher counted. Another said their child was grabbed by the neck by a classroom assistant. And another again said, my child spent most of his sporadic time at primary school alone in the medical room due to no support staff being available for him. This is the tip of the iceberg. There are hundreds of other similar stories. We are failing these children with special needs, and the use of restraint and seclusion is completely unacceptable. Now, it's clear that the guidance issued by the Scottish Government in 2017, however well-intentioned, is simply not working. Local authorities are required to have policies in place to deal with physical intervention, but as the Children and Young People's Commissioner established, little has actually been implemented at a local authority level. Presiding Officer, only 18 out of 32 local authorities record all incidents of restraint and seclusion, which means that 14 simply don't. 4 local authorities don't even bother to record anything at all. And neither does the Scottish Government, although they've been encouraged to do so by none other than the United Nations. Now, the Commissioner's investigation came up with 22 different recommendations. I won't rehearse them all here in detail, but suffice to say that, frankly, progress needs to be urgently made. Because, Presiding Officer, this is fundamentally about human rights. The human rights of these children and young people with learning disabilities is being breached day in and day out because of the practice of inappropriate seclusion and restraint. Now, I recognise, we all do, that teachers are overworked. They're starved of resources. They're struggling in the classroom. I've seen the reduction in my own area in classroom assistants and the lack of specialist support for pupils with additional support needs. That is true, not just in my area, but across the country. But that must not be an excuse for failing these children and letting them down so badly. All children in Scotland have the right to be safe, to be healthy, to be nurtured, active, respected, and to be included. All children have the right to expect that when they go to school for the day, that they are in safe hands. Now, for many children with an additional support need, including those with a learning disability or autism, we know it can be extremely difficult for them to communicate verbally. So sometimes they will use different sets of behaviours and actions to try and tell us what's wrong. And I know it can sometimes present a really challenging situation for that child, for their peers in the classroom, and also for their teachers. So it's therefore really important that in both mainstream and specialist settings, that schools understand how to support children to communicate how they're feeling, to avoid distress, and to have systems in place that keep children safe and respected. The Enable campaign in Safe Hands makes 4 very simple recommendations that I would commend to the Cabinet Secretary. Firstly, we need stronger dedicated guidance. Now, I welcome the Short Life Working Group set up by the Scottish Government, but we need monitoring of the guidance post-publication to ensure that this time it is properly implemented. And perhaps, dare I suggest it, we maybe need statutory guidance to make people sit up and pay attention. We also need to ensure that the membership of that Short Life Working Group is truly inclusive, and I would invite the Cabinet Secretary to work with Enable Scotland to make sure that that is the case. But secondly, we need strategies that can be applied in the classroom, positive support techniques, dedicated specialist staff, as well as training for the whole school workforce, because this isn't about teachers alone. And thirdly, there is a real need for a duty of candour around restraint and seclusion in all schools. Parents have a fundamental right to know what's going on with their child, and I am genuinely surprised that the Scottish Government doesn't agree. So I would urge the Cabinet Secretary, please revisit this and include it in the future guidance that you're preparing. And finally, Presiding Officer, we need to strengthen transparency and accountability. Who is responsible for overseeing this area of policy? Should it be the Mental Welfare Commission, the Care Inspectorate, or Education Scotland? Do you know, if we don't identify clearly who should watch over this and own this, then the children will continue to fall between the gaps, as we've seen happen so far. So seclusion and restraint is against the human rights of a child or young person. It's frankly appalling. Every day there are children subjected to the inappropriate use of seclusion and restraint in Scotland's schools. That is not just appalling, it's embarrassing. There is no time to waste, and the practice must end now.
We move to the open debate, and I call Ruth Maguire to be followed by Jeremy Balfour.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. And can I start by thanking Jackie Baillie for bringing this important debate to the Chamber, and also Enable Scotland for their campaign and their briefing about the campaign in Safe Hands. Now, all behaviour is a form of communication. For many children, particularly those with additional support for learning needs, it can be really tough to communicate how they're feeling verbally. A child's challenging or inappropriate behaviour is a sign that he or she is upset and that something's not right. Adults and children are communicating something through their behaviour during every moment in every day, even if they're not aware of it. So communicating through behaviour and actions should be expected and understood. And where it's not understood, this can present a challenging and upsetting situation for everyone. For the child trying to express themselves and express their needs, for their peers, for the teachers and staff doing their best to support the child. To keep them safe, healthy, achieving, nurtured, active, respected, responsible, and to be included, it's crucial that all schools, that mainstream schools and specialist schools, are crystal clear about how to support children and young people, how to support them to communicate how they're feeling, particularly when those feelings are difficult, how to support them to avoid feeling distressed, and where that's not possible, to have really clear guidance and protocols in place to keep the children safe and respected. And I do support Enable Scotland's asks from the campaign in Safe Hands. Jackie Baillie mentioned them, they probably bear repeating. Enable are asking for stronger dedicated guidance on the use of restraint and seclusion in schools, a rollout of positive support strategies in all schools through skilled staff with a minimum standard, and that every school has at least 2 trained staff on site at all times. And the introduction of a duty of candour around restraint and seclusion for all schools. And I would support Jackie Bailey's comments that it's helpful, not only a right for parents, but that it's helpful for parents to understand how their child's school day has been, so they can have a happy home time as well. I also support that they're asked that there's a strengthening of transparency and accountability with powers of oversight resting with the appropriate body. I think it is important to acknowledge, as Enable do in their briefing, the positive movement that has been made on the issuing of guidance. So I would add my support to Enable's asks that the further recommendations are progressed. It's really important that the guidance translates into improved practice, and practice that makes a difference to children. Presiding Officer, our Parliament will soon incorporate the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child. Now, the UNCRC is clear that restraint and seclusion may violate a child's rights, including their right to be free from cruel and violate a child's rights, including their right to be free from cruel, inhuman or degrading treatment or punishment, their right to respect for bodily integrity. I said at the beginning of my remarks that all behaviour and action is a form of communication. As a Parliament, we can communicate really clearly in our actions that children in Scotland are in safe hands. So let's do what Enable ask of us and communicate clearly that children's rights to be safe, healthy, achieving, nurtured, active, respected, responsible and included are not only upheld but promoted. Thank you.
Jeremy Balfour, followed by Daniel Johnson.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. Can I also thank Jackie Bailey for bringing forward this important debate this afternoon. I had a meeting recently with a professional worker in the third sector who referred to learning disability as the Cinderella of the disabilities. He explained that children and adults with learning disabilities are often unable to communicate verbally and as a result do not receive the attention they deserve. Bearing this in mind, I would like to thank Enable, the charity responsible for producing the report we are debating tonight, for their ongoing work to improve the lives of people who live with learning disabilities. By listening and acting on the issues that are important to their members, they have produced a number of important reports, including In Safe Hands and Included in the Main. And acting on the issues that are important to their members, they have produced a number of important reports, including In Safe Hands and Included in the Main, which make for very uncomfortable reading. I find it distressing reading parents' accounts of their children's experience of situations that have led to the need for restraint and seclusion. Incidents where an inability to communicate verbally led to behaviours and actions that were not understood by staff, resulting in terrible situations for the child, their peers and staff, and in the worst cases, breaching their rights, resulting in terrible situations for the child, their peers and staff, and in the worst cases, breaching the rights of the child. And seclusion is governed in schools across all 32 local authorities here in Scotland. The Commission identified significant variance in the availability and content of local education authority guidance on seclusion and restraint, with similar concerns relating to the training standards in supporting children who have verbal communication challenges to avoid escalations and to support them with regard to their rights. Enable's report makes a number of recommendations, and I would hope that the Scottish Government and the Cabinet Secretary could get behind them and support them this evening. I would like to focus on recommendation 2, that refers to the rollout of positive support strategies in all schools through skilled staff, with a minimum standard that every school has at least 2 trained staff on site at all times. I believe the issue of access to appropriately trained staff is paramount. If we want to protect the rights of vulnerable children and prevent the need for restraint, we need to make sure that this happens. We have a presumption of mainstreaming in education, but repeatedly I hear from families, from parents, and even from local authorities and teachers that there is simply not the help and practice there to make it happen in practice. This feedback supports the findings of Enable's included in the main report that revealed that 62% of teachers that they spoke to said that they had experienced stress and professional anxiety due to not having the right support to meet the needs of pupils who are learning with learning disabilities. When asked about training, 98% of the education workforce felt that the teacher training did not adequately prepare them for teaching young people who have learning disabilities. If we truly want to be inclusive, if we truly want to support these children properly and protect their rights, then we must ensure that teachers and support staff have the appropriate skill set. Yet currently, the General Teaching Council is not required to access teachers' ability to demonstrate a speciality in regard to this. If the Scottish Government is really serious about getting it right for every child and wants to avoid the use of restraint and seclusion, they have to ensure that the appropriate levels of specialist trained staff are available to support children with additional support needs. In turn, local authorities must ensure there is no restraint or seclusion taking place within their schools. Enable have listened to their members and are acting on the issues that are important to them. I would encourage the Parliament and the Scottish Government to continue to listen to key stakeholders, listen to children, listen to parents, and make sure our schools are safe for everyone. Thank you.
Daniel Johnson, followed by Alison Johnston.
Thank you, Deputy Presiding Officer. And can I begin by thanking my colleague, Jackie Bailey, for securing this debate, because I think this is an issue that simply we have to keep shining a light on. And I think it's important because it's very easy when you're talking about a subject like this to get trapped in terminology, statistics, talk of policies and guidelines, looking at behaviours, when actually, in essence, what we're looking at is the experience of children and young people in school who we should be providing an education. And in some ways, if I could urge people to do one thing, is actually look at in the In Safe Hands report and just read the first page, which asks you to imagine what it's like to be a 6-year-old. Imagine you have a learning disability. You find it difficult to communicate. You really struggle when you see the colour red. A teacher takes you to one side, and as you sit on a red cushion, you get agitated, and you can't explain why. You get so agitated, you start getting angry and lashing out. And so the teacher takes you and puts you in a room by yourself. Can you imagine what that's like? Because we all know what it's like to get agitated, things that trigger us, and make us upset in a way that we can't explain. And that, in essence, is what we're dealing with. Because all too often we look at the behaviour, but we're not thinking about the experience and how we can engage with that. And so I think we have to pay tribute to the people that have put so much effort to give the focus and attention that this issue deserves. And Beth Morrison, above all others, I think has done phenomenal work. And it's brilliant that she's here this evening in the gallery. And I was really fortunate to speak to her in recent days. And I just think she is someone who really deserves a huge amount of credit for bringing forward her petition, which led to the work that has already been done by the Scottish Government, that has led to a number of other bits of work, and ultimately has led us to the point where we have Enable's campaign, In Safe Hands, launched in December last year. Because I think it is important that while progress has been made, it isn't enough. There's still an awful lot of work to do, because the facts are these. And the Children's Commissioner was very clear in the report they produced in 2018 with 22 recommendations, focusing on reporting, the need for better guidance, better training, about the need to implement a rights-based approach. Then we had the Not Included, Not Engaged, Not Involved, which had over 1,400 responses, which I personally found harrowing and troubling, and was my point at which I became truly aware of this issue and felt the need to highlight it. And the numbers, and we do have to look at the numbers, in the In Safe Hands document that we have here, highlights the fact in 2018 there were 2,674 incidents of restraint. involving 386 children. That's an average of just under 7 instances of restraint per child. And if that's the average, that means for some children, this is something that is happening on a monthly, if not weekly, and perhaps even a daily basis. I think that puts the scale of this and the importance of this in the correct terms. But I think this is also about terminology, because it's easy to use terms like restraint and seclusion, safe places, isolation booths, soft booths. But as Lady Hale put it in the Supreme Court, a gilded cage is still a cage. And as the Children's Commissioner put it, that if we are going to have these practices, it must ensure that these are spaces being used as part of a planned response, not something that is being imposed upon the child. And this is something that can be dealt with. I was recently at the meeting of an organisation that works with adults with learning disabilities. In the last year, they have managed to reduce the use of restraint by 50% and are targeting by 0 through better training of their people. And that's why the In-Safe Hand calls are so important and so relevant. We need better guidance. We need strategies and training. If for no other reason that only 12% of teachers feel they have adequate training. We have a duty of candour, but above all else, let's have the transparency and accountability, because as Jackie Bailey points out, 14 local authorities simply aren't recording this information. Unless we know what's going on, we can't tackle it. And that quite simply is not good enough. Thank you.
And the last of the open debate contributions is from Alison Johnson.
Thank you, Presiding Officer. I too would like to thank Beth Morrison for her contribution and the fact that we're debating this issue this evening, and to Jackie Bailey for bringing this debate to the Chamber. I should say that I will need to leave immediately afterwards as I have another commitment. I think we'd all agree that our schools are places where all of our children and young people play and learn and grow. But for those with a learning disability who perhaps sometimes find it harder to communicate how they feel or what they're worried about, their school isn't always a friendly and nurturing place. And we hear that sometimes young people with a learning disability, their behaviour can be interpreted as challenging. And physically restraining or secluding them, sometimes in locked rooms, is too often, clearly too often, seen as the solution. At just under 2,700 incidents of restraint and seclusion in 2017-18, we need to urgently examine whether there's clear enough guidance and regulation around these practices and whether staff are being properly supported. And just as concerning, these 2,674 incidents identified by the Children and Young People's Commissioner involve 386 children. Daniel Johnston has already made the point. This means that some children are being restrained or secluded 7 times a year. For some children, it will be much higher than that. I think something's going badly wrong if practices which are supposed to be the very last resort are being used on some children almost once a month in the school year. So this is fundamentally a children's rights issue. In 2018, the Scottish Children and Young People's Commissioner, the guardian of children's rights here in Scotland, he became so worried about the impact of restraint and seclusion on Scottish children and their rights that he invoked his investigatory powers for the first time. The UN Committee on the Rights of the Child expressed concern at the use of restraint and seclusion on disabled children, including children with autism in schools, and it recommended that restraint is used against children exclusively to prevent harm to the child or others and only as a last resort. But it isn't clear that in all of those almost 2,700 instances, if it was really the last resort and that no harm was involved. Indeed, the Challenging Behaviour Foundation and Positive and Active Behaviour Support Scotland, they found that 58% of families who they surveyed said that restraint had in fact led to injury. 91% of CBF survey respondents reported a negative emotional impact on their child. So given the seriousness of using physical restraint against pupils and of secluding them, I do find it absolutely astonishing that there's not been a proper system for recording this. And as well as some local authorities lacking guidance on these practices, the Children's Commissioner No Safe Place report noted that not all instances were recorded and different local authorities recorded seclusion and restraint in inconsistent ways. 10 local authorities failed to record all instances, and 4 didn't record any at all. So the 2,700 instances referred to in the motion, I mean, it's almost certain to be an underestimate. So I very much welcome the Scottish Government's intention to develop a standard reporting system to ensure consistent recording and monitoring of incidents, and I look forward to learning more of the timescale. But part of the problem here is a lack of resourcing of our teaching and support staff. My colleague Ross Greer has drawn attention to the precipitous decline in the number of ASN staff over the past decade. Between 2010 and 16, there was a 145% increase in the number of pupils with additional support needs. At the same time, the number of ASN teachers and ASN support staff in our schools has decreased. The ratio of ASN pupils to ASN teachers has gone from 18 pupils to 1 teacher in 2010 to 58 in 2018. Enable Scotland's earlier included in the main report revealed that fewer than 12% of the education workforce felt satisfied that they can meet the educational and developmental needs of a child or young person who has a learning disability. There are a variety of established techniques which support children who have additional support for learning needs to be included safely alongside their peers. These are standard in health and social care settings, and it's important that school staff have access to the training in these techniques. So Greens really welcome Enable's calls for positive support strategies to be rolled out to all schools so that there are 2 trained staff on site all the time. To close, Presiding Officer, last year my colleague John Finney was successful in providing children with equal protection from physical assault. That was a landmark step towards protecting the rights of Scottish children in law, but we can't claim to be the safest place, the best place in the world for children to grow up if children, overwhelmingly those with ASN, are subject in school to practices which the UN and our Children's Commissioner say contravene their rights. Thank you, Presiding Officer.
I now invite John Swinney to respond to the debate for around 7 minutes, please, Cabinet Secretary.
Presiding Officer, let me begin by thanking Jackie Bailey for highlighting the important and sensitive issue of physical intervention and seclusion in schools, which is rightly a matter of the utmost concern to each and every member in Parliament today. I would also like to join with others, with Jackie Bailey and Daniel Johnson, in paying tribute to Beth Morrison, the petitioner who has campaigned tirelessly on this issue for a number of years. The tenacity and devotion of Mrs Morrison is much to be admired, and the progress that she has made is a tribute to the effectiveness of the public petitions system in taking forward issues that are drawn to the attention of members of Parliament by that route, and the success of Mrs Morrison in navigating her way through that process and in making the progress on this issue is to be widely commended. Ruth Maguire made the point that all behaviour is a form of communication, and I agree entirely with that sentiment. And it reminds me of the important work that one of my own constituents, Kate Sanger, has undertaken in the development of a communication passport, which is utilised as a productive and positive aspect of supporting young people to enable them to be able to express themselves and to be able to be well supported in an educational setting. And I commend that work in addition to that of Mrs Morrison. I recognise the Enable Scotland's campaign in Safe Hands, which seeks to end the inappropriate use of physical intervention and seclusion in schools with children and young people who have a learning disability, and promotes the rights of some of the country's most vulnerable pupils. I also recognise that the Children and Young People's Commissioner's report made a range of recommendations following its investigation into this area, and I'll return to that report shortly. I have been and continue to be clear that physical intervention and seclusion should only ever be used as a last resort, and when in the best interests of the child or young person, and when all other forms of positive early intervention have been unsuccessful in resolving a situation. The use of any unlawful physical intervention or seclusion is completely unacceptable, and I reaffirm my determination that the inappropriate use of physical intervention or seclusion on any child or young person must end within Scottish education. The In Safe Hands report calls on the Scottish Government to take a number of actions. Firstly, I would like to pay tribute to the bravery of the children and young people and their families who shared their experiences of physical intervention and seclusion in our schools. I absolutely recognise the concerns raised about the inappropriate use of physical intervention and seclusion. In addition to the Enable report, the Children and Young People's Commissioner Scotland report, No Safe Place, made a number of recommendations to the Scottish Government. While the Scottish Government agreed with many of these recommendations, we were unable to agree with them all. I have actively engaged with the Children's Commissioner and the Equality and Human Rights Commission to find a way forward, and in December I announced that we made significant progress and reached agreement that the Scottish Government will produce new national guidance which will provide a clear human and children's rights-based policy on physical intervention and seclusion in Scottish schools. In our discussions, which echo many of the issues that are raised by Enable Scotland, it was clear that by listening and engaging with key stakeholders that the guidance can be delivered in a way which meets everyone's needs, and I include in that respect the issues and points raised by Enable Scotland. Following this agreement with the Children and Young People's Commissioner and the Equality and Human Rights Commission, a working group of key stakeholders was formed and met for the first time on the 20th of January. I am pleased that both the Children and Young People's Commissioner and also representatives of Enable Scotland have agreed to join this working group. The group has agreed to focus on 3 specific areas: the key definitions, the new guidance, and the recording and monitoring of incidents of physical intervention and seclusion. Our approach to new guidance and its review will be informed by the views of children, young people and their families. It is the intention of the Scottish Government to consult on the draft guidance in October 2020, with the publication of the final guidance in January 2021. This approach has been fully endorsed by the Scottish Advisory Group for Relationships and Behaviour in Schools Group, which crucially includes representatives from the Convention of Scottish Local Authorities and the Association of Directors of Education in Scotland, and of all of the main teaching unions. The representatives of these organisations are, of course, responsible for the delivery of education at local level, and it's vital that we engage them and involve them in our efforts to ensure that we tackle this particular issue. We will ensure that any significant revision to our current guidance on physical intervention and seclusion is clear that the issue of physical intervention and seclusion is set within an approach that places positive relationships and behaviour at its core, with a continued focus on de-escalation and prevention. A key aspect of a whole-school approach to intervening early and reducing the need for physical intervention is staff having an understanding and an awareness of de-escalation techniques. All staff should be offered professional learning opportunities to learn about early intervention, prevention and de-escalation techniques, and to understand different types of challenging and distressed behaviour. The working group has been established to take forward the work to revise the physical intervention and seclusion guidance, has also committed to developing and introducing a standard data set across all local authorities. This will ensure improvements in consistency of approach to recording and monitoring as part of developing a system that enables a streamlined method of recording. It is my view that statistical data should not be analysed in isolation at a national level. By recording and monitoring incidents at a local level, schools and authorities, as the appropriate bodies, are able to identify trends or themes emerging and implement improvements to support the well-being of all children and young people. When we have worked to reach this agreement, I agreed that the working group would also review the effectiveness of the guidance. Scottish Government officials will develop a plan and delivery for this review in conjunction with the working group, which will begin 12 months after the publication of the guidance. If following the review it is found that the guidance does not have the desired impact, I will at that time consider other options, including statutory means, to ensure that the guidance reaches our agreed goal. I believe that the actions that I have agreed to take forward and have set out before Parliament today will, with our partners, deliver an approach in Scotland which places at its core positive relationships and behaviour, solutions that are focused on restorative approaches within the context of children's and human rights. I am absolutely committed to ensuring that an effective approach is adopted in Scotland's schools when considering the use of physical intervention and seclusion in its correct place as a last resort and never as a purpose, in the form of purposes of punishment. I thank Jackie Baillie for raising this important and sensitive issue. I thank Enable Scotland for championing this particular issue, and Beth Morrison for advancing the arguments that have brought us to the point that we are at today. I believe that the measures the Government is putting in place In concert with a range of stakeholders and after dialogue with the Children and Young People's Commissioner and the Human Rights Commissioner, it provides us with a robust approach to ensure that we tackle this important issue, that we improve the climate that surrounds children and young people in these circumstances, and it reaffirms our commitment and our intent to ensure that all of our children and young people are able to grow, learn, develop and reach their full potential within Scotland.
That concludes the debate and this meeting is closed.